the bell that rang without sound. Elorin Brightlea woke while the moon was still, considering the rim of the window, and the candle that never tired gave its small round glow as if it were keeping a promise. And he lay for a moment and listened to the way the tower breathed, wood easing in its joints, stone remembering river coolness, the hush of rooms holding what they knew without asking for attention. And in that listening he felt the gentle residue of the night market still resting in him, the pause he had earned with a story the evening before, and the seed note that slept in a jar on the sill. And he smiled because even his smile felt unhurried, like water that has learned its path. He rose and set bare feet to the friendly floor, greeted the stone with his palm, and watched the traveler light lean toward the paling sky. And he thought of Master Aldrin's quiet way of placing a lesson on the day like a folded cloth one only needs to unfold. And as he dressed he felt the inward compass give the mildest warmth near his ribs, as if to say that a new path did not depend on turning, it depended on noticing. The morning had a soft taste of mint because the window had been open, and the leaves in the garden below always send up their scent to those who say good morning. And Elorin thanked the air for carrying such kindness. He ate a slice of bread with honey and a sip of warm milk, and he tied his laces with the same care one gives a word that wants to land gently. And he stepped into the stair that curled up the tower like a polite vine. With each turn the light thinned until it was only a suggestion, then widened again as another arrow slit showed a pale strip of sky. And though he had climbed these steps many times, this time his attention discovered a new quiet along the inner wall, a sense that a room high above had been waiting to be found. He reached the top, and the door of the highest chamber eased inward at his hand. And there the room lived exactly as old rooms like to live, with a broom that kept all its bristles, with a table that had learned to be steady without bragging, with a deep window where sparrows came to think, and hanging from a simple beam, a bronze bell of good shape and honest weight. It was not large and not small, it was exactly as it wished to be, with a lip that caught the light like a shallow bowl, and a crown that wore a little bloom of age. And its clapper rested inside it without any opinion about the day. Elorin stood very still as if he had been expected. And perhaps he had, because something about the bell spoke to him without sound. He stepped closer and looked at the way the sunlight slid along the curve, and paused at the slender seam where the bell had once been joined. And he felt the air around it holding a patience that did not need to be earned. He reached out as one reaches toward a creature that will choose whether to stay or go, and laid his fingertips upon the rim, and when he did the room grew more itself. The hair along his arms lifted the smallest amount, and in his chest a tone appeared, not heard with ears but with the entire space where breath lives, a tone that was round and low and kind. He did not move the clapper. He did not strike the bronze. The bell rang anyway, not through air but through the simple fact of being near. The vibration arrived like an old friend who sits down beside you and does not need to talk to be understood. Elorin let the tone pass through him and into the floor and along the old timbers and down the stair and back up again. and in its passing he felt his shoulders set down a weight they had forgotten they were carrying, the small habit of leaning forward into the next task. And the tone asked him with a smile he could feel and not see to stand a little taller and a little softer. He breathed and the breath stayed longer, and the longer staying made room for more quiet to join. He did not hurry to name anything, he only listened. The bell showed him steadiness and he answered with stillness. And in that exchange something in the morning widened. Outside the high window the sparrows drew graceful letters upon the air, and the river beyond the hill turned its shoulder with a shine that seemed to agree with everything. Elorin touched the rim again, and the soundless ring returned as if it had been waiting very near for that second invitation. He looked down at his hands, brown from sun and peppered with faint freckles that had been counted by Luma the fox on another evening, and he felt the ring move along the bones like light traveling through water. He thought of how Master Aldrin says that some lessons arrive in the first language, which is the language of the heart before it learned to shape words, and this felt like such a lesson. He stood there and the bell rang in him, teaching him that silence is not the absence of music. It is a kind of music that does not travel by ear. After a while he sat on the floor with his back against the warm stone and the bell above him, and he let the sunlight play along his knees. And in that sitting he understood that the bell was not asking to be used or owned or mastered. It was asking to be met. He closed his eyes and met it. The world settled its feathers. Time put down its bag and rested its feet. When he opened his eyes, he felt as if he had learned something and also as if he had always known it. He stood and bowed the smallest bow one offers to a friend who has told the truth, and he went down the stair carrying the ring with him. He did not notice that his pace had changed. He noticed only that the rooms he passed seemed pleased to be rooms. In the kitchen he lifted the kettle and filled it, and the water did not scold when it met the metal. It simply gathered itself for warmth. He set cups near the window for Master Aldrin and for himself and for the traveler light, which always looks happier when included. And when the older wizard arrived with the lines around his eyes soft from sleep, he paused in the doorway and tilted his head as if listening to a far meadow. And then he nodded and smiled and said that the high places have begun their work. Elorin told him about the bell in the top room and how it rang without sound, and how the ring moved through the timbers in his bones, and how the light found it and wanted to stay. And Master Aldrin listened with both hands wrapped around his cup as if the cup were a small animal that enjoyed being held. And when Elorin had finished, he said that some bells are cast with an alloy that remembers the breath of those who made it, and that such bells learn to ring in the chest that meets them. Honestly, and then the older wizard added no more because there was nothing additional the day required. They drank, and the tea tasted like leaves that had agreed to be water and not lost themselves in the agreeing. After breakfast, Elorin carried the ring into his tasks without trying to. He swept the step and found that the broom moved in arcs that made the dust enjoy becoming a new place on the path. He went to the garden and knelt where star-fed blossoms keep their modest promises, and he pressed soil around a stem that had been asking for a friend, and the stem straightened with the relief of being understood. He took a jar of oil to a hinge that had lately complained and touched the pin, and the pin accepted the kindness with a whisper that sounded pleased with itself without being proud. Through it all the ring did not fade. It waited for him to remember it, and each time he remembered, it returned as steady as the first time. Luma came then, quiet as a thought that means no harm, and set her slender paws on the path and watched him with that silver glimmer in her whiskers that made her seem made of evening. Elorin spoke her name the way one speaks the name of a friend in a library, and she came and rested her head against his knee, and in that small weight he felt the ring again. And he laughed because the bell seemed to have learned how to move through fox as well as boy, and Luma's ears tilted as if they too were small bells learning what to do with calm. A little later he took the path toward the village with a basket of candles kindly packed by the maker who knows the wishes of windows. And when he reached the green, the children were drawing chalk rivers and chalk hills and chalk boats. And he set the basket down and watched as the ring in him changed the way he watched. Everything seemed to move at the right speed. A girl laughed, and the laugh did not rush away. It stayed for a moment longer so the leaves could hear. A boy frowned at a line he had pressed too hard and then smiled at how easily he could draw beside it. And the ring in Elorin's chest hummed with approval even before any words found their way into the air. He handed a candle to the schoolroom and another to the small clinic where herbs learned to help. And at each doorway he paused just long enough for the ring to reach the hinge and remind it of kindness. On his way back to Wistmere he stopped by the river to listen. And the water had chosen a slower sentence near the willow, and each stone in the shallows wore a hat of light that seemed easy to carry. He breathed with the river, and the river breathed with him, and in that exchange a dragonfly came to write its cursive near his sleeve and then continued. And he took this as a signature and felt oddly formal about it in a pleasant way. The stair to the top room welcomed him again, and he went up with the steady step of someone who knows a door will not change its mind. The bell waited as it had waited, no less alive and no more urgent, and he stood at its side and lifted the clapper a finger's width and then set it back without letting it touch. And the bell answered anyway, a deep movement of presence that made his ribs widen and his neck lengthen, and the tower itself seemed to lean a small fraction nearer to hear better. Elorin placed both hands upon the bronze and felt its coolness as an invitation rather than a distance. He closed his eyes and was taught how to stand so that heaviness has no reason to stay. And he was taught how to breathe as if the breath owned the room and had decided to make everyone feel included. He practiced letting his jaw rest and his tongue live where it prefers, and his shoulders remember that they are bridges and not shelves. The bell was a teacher without chalk or slate, a teacher who only asks you to listen with the parts of you that know how to listen. The listening made him remember the night market and the pavilion where stories were coins, and he felt the leaf card the elder had given him still safe in his pocket. And he thought how the bell's silent ring was the twin of the bell note that slept in the seed-shaped jar, and how both belonged to the same family of kindness. The morning turned toward noon, and Master Aldrin climbed the stair with a small bowl of lemon water and a cloth for the glass of the long view. He watched in the doorway for a moment and then set the bowl upon the sill and said that the bell is older than the top room, and that once there had been a wooden frame on the hill where townsfolk would gather at dusk to listen to nothing, and that listening had been so helpful that the bell was later given a roof and a tower and the care of those who live with books. Elorin listened to that history and felt it join the ring the way a harmony joins a melody with no need to be noticed. They cleaned the glass with slow circles, and Elorin discovered that if he moved the cloth in time with his breath, the surface agreed more readily to shine. He smiled at the river that took the sky for a walk, and the orchard that practiced leaf arithmetic, and the distant roofs that learned sunlight again every noon. And the bell was there in his chest as steady as the line of the horizon. When Master Aldrin left to visit the village, Elorin remained and wrote nothing on a page so that the page could relax. He traced the rim of the bell with a fingertip the way one traces the rim of a bowl to see who made it, and he thought perhaps he could feel the hands of the person who had cast it long ago, the pull of a ladle, the patience of stirring, the breath held at the right moment, the satisfaction when cooling gave the shape permission to stay. He whispered thank you, and the ring answered with a warmth low in his belly that spread like tea through a cold morning. The sun moved, and its angle told another story on the floorboards. And in that new story Elorin saw a circle of light under the bell, and he placed his feet within it and found that the ring joined his steps, so that he was walking without going anywhere and still arriving. He laughed softly because it felt like the kind of magic that turns out to be the most useful magic that tells you how to be where you are. He sat and wrote a small letter in his mind to the child in the village who sometimes worried about being enough. And he asked the bell to carry the letter. And he felt sure that the letter would arrive inside a moment when the child would be surprised by ease. Later he went down and tended to small chores as if they were flowers, and each chore opened exactly as much as it wished and no more. He polished a spoon, and the spoon remembered how to reflect without trying too hard. He folded a cloth, and the cloth consented to straight corners. He added water to the bowls in the starlit garden so they would be ready to receive guests after dark. When he returned to the top room, he found that the bell had not grown bored with him, which made him absurdly happy in a tender way. He discovered a pattern for meeting it. A few breaths with eyes open, a few with eyes closed, a few with hands resting on the rim, a few with hands resting on his own ribs to feel how the ring had found a home. The pattern did not need to be kept forever. It happened that day, and the day accepted it without making a rule. In mid-afternoon, the owl wrote a pale sentence across the window, and Luma's shadow crossed the yard, and the river offered a thoughtful sparkle, and Elorin felt as if the whole place was ringing with him. He did not think he was important for this reason. He thought instead that it was beautiful to be in the middle of a kindness that did not need a reason. Evening crept like a friendly cat, quiet and sure, and Elorin lit the traveler light, and the little flame stood beside the candle that does not tire, each bending a fraction as if they had met in school and discovered they were cousins. He climbed to the top room again because some evenings want to end in the place where they began. And he bowed to the bell and placed a hand upon it and felt the ring like a slow tide rolling through a harbor. And he understood that the bell had taught him to hear a space inside sound. A soft room inside a loud one. A calm center inside any weather. The owl alighted on the sill and gave him that round look that feels like approval, and then turned its head and looked at the bronze with a regard usually reserved for moons. And Elorin laughed quietly, and the laugh stayed in the room like a pleasant perfume. He took the seed jar from his pocket and opened it a fingertip, and the soft captured note joined the room, and the bell answered the note, and the room answered both, and for a lovely moment the world was made entirely of circles that understood one another. He closed the jar and set it back, and the circles did not stop simply because there was no longer a lid to lift. He found that reassuring. He went to bed with the ring moving like a lullaby, and he slept the kind of sleep that fields enjoy after rain. Near dawn he dreamed that he stood again beneath the bell and that a line of villagers came quietly up the stair, each placing a hand on the rim the way you might touch the shoulder of a loved one. And the bell rang in each of them according to their own hearts. The baker wearing a tone that smelled faintly of crust and steam. The shepherd wearing a tone that sounded like grass undoing its curls. The teacher wearing a tone that tasted of chalk dust warmed by sun. And when he woke he felt sure that the dream had told him a true thing, that the bell is as generous as a good morning. He rose and watched the first faint gold touch the orchard, and he pressed his palm to the window stone and said thank you aloud, not because the bell required thanks, but because saying thank you was the best way to keep the ring company. In the days that followed, Elorin discovered that the bell did not live only in the top room. It lived in the way he waited before answering, in the way he let a pot come to the edge of a simmer and no further, in the way he listened to a leaf's complaint and did not hurry it. He rang it without hands when he stepped aside to let an ant carry a piece of leaf larger than itself. When he polished the long glass and noticed the smear disappear both from the pane and from his thoughts. When he set a book down with a small pat so the book would know it could rest. He rang it when he helped the candle maker tie a ribbon around a box of lights for a neighbor, and when he carried a stool across the village green not for himself but for the old man who liked to count swallows. He rang it when he stood on the ridge with Master Aldrin and saw the valley hold the morning like a bowl. He rang it in the schoolroom by breathing longer and letting the room learn his breathing without instruction, and the room responded by becoming kinder to the child with the chalk rivers. He rang it at the riverbank by letting the silence between two water sounds grow just large enough for a third kind thought to enter. He rang it in the garden by trimming a stem only after speaking a small apology. He rang it in the cave under the hill when he visited the dragon who slept his mountain sleep, and he sat in the soft sand and drew a spiral and watched the sand remember and then forget in exactly the right order. And he knew that the bell and the dragon belonged to the same family of caretakers who keep their watch through rest. He rang it as he wrote a letter to no one and set it upon the sill for the moths to carry. A letter that said the world is kinder when we let it be kinder, and that he was learning to let it. With each ring that made no sound, the rooms of his days became rooms he wished to keep visiting. He found that he did not need to do anything special to deserve such rooms. He needed only to notice them and to enter them and to invite others in with him, the way one opens a window because the morning would like to be a guest. On a cool evening when the stars were early and the river practiced being silver, Elorin climbed to the top room one more time and stood under the beam and placed his hands upon the bronze. He did not ask for anything and nothing asked for him. The bell held its shape and the shape held its story, and he held both and let both hold him. The ring rose again and moved through him and into the room and into the tower and down the stair and into the ground and out along the roots and into the river and back into the air above the hill. And he saw the owl tilt its head as if listening, and Luma raise her ears, and a child in the village look up from a book, and the candle maker pause with a ribbon, and Master Aldrin turned slowly with a smile, and he knew without words that the bell had been heard by everyone who needed it, not with ears but with the space that lives behind the breath. He let the ring fade of its own accord, which is to say he did nothing to hold it and it did not need to be held. He bowed again and went down the stair and into his room, where the traveler light and the tireless candle stood like two friends who have said everything and happily sit in silence. He lay on his side and let the day close like a well-loved book, and as he drifted he promised to carry the bell inside him wherever rooms wished to become kinder. And the tower breathed and the river turned its shoulder and the night put a calm hand on the world.